You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live.
Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. We are here to dissect Derby 1, Forest 1, give our thoughts on the game and whether Forest should be disappointed, relieved or whatever their emotions should be after that game against their arch rivals. Joined today by two returning Forest fans in Michael Temple and Mikey Clarke. Temps, good evening, are you well?
Evening, Matt. Yeah, really good, thanks. A little bit bitter after watching that, but can't complain.
And Mikey, are you well or bitter or anguished? How are you?
I'm still digesting some of it, to be honest with you. But no, I'm all right, Matt. Are you okay?
Yes, not too bad, not too bad. Let's digest then away. Overall thoughts, Temps, were you a fair result or are you leaving disappointed?
I'm leaving disappointed. I think Kazim Richards handballed that in the touch prior to last year. Great finish, has to be said. I think we need to take these half chances. There's been some instances tonight where we've created 3 or 4 half chances. The header from Krovinovic, header from Knockaert, and we need to stick them away. I think trying to win games when you're struggling to score more than 1 goal in a game is always going to be a challenge. So I think we grew into the game. Derby arguably had us under the cosh a bit last 20 minutes. But on the balance of play, I think we were worthy of 3 points and disappointed we were walking away with 1.
Mikey, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, summed up nicely by Temps there, to be honest. I think I'm not going to be hypocritical. Before the game, I was asked whether I'd take a point, and I said yeah. So a point is what we got. So I guess that's good. I think the way the game panned out, I'm a little bit frustrated with how it ended. I think second half particularly, we were very, very good. We were managing the game really well. And then I think whether it's mentality or whether it's nervousness, or I think Temps made a very good point about if we don't score more than 1 goal, it's very, very difficult to then hold on to a lead. And I think, and I'm sure we'll come on to it in a bit, Matt, that the substitutions near the end were a little bit baffling, if I'm honest. But overall, I'm not too disappointed. Points a decent result. It keeps the good run of form up. And I guess we move on to another big game at the weekend. I think it's Luton, isn't it? So that's a good chance to get all 3 points there.
Yeah, I mean, we were on to the subs. And I must admit, I'm a bit disappointed myself. I mean, I covered the Swansea game and left that feeling very positive that they'd gone toe-to-toe with the top side. But I didn't think Derby were a top side. I thought they showed them way too much respect. But we'll come on to that. I mean, a lot of comments about this Luke Freeman here and people not happy with his performance. What did you make of the starting 11, Mikey? I mean, were you surprised Freeman played and what did you make of his performance?
Wasn't necessarily surprised that Chris started him. I think me personally, and I think a lot of Forest fans probably wouldn't. I think now Amiobi's been back in training. Lolley's been chomping at the bit. Myton, who got the start the other week, scored a goal and then obviously was rested for the Rotherham game because of the type of game we thought it might be. I would have been really tempted to bring one of those guys in rather than revert back to Freeman. But I guess Chris has probably looked at it and thought, do you know what, when he's come in, he's done okay, we've looked solid. And I guess with 15 minutes to go, you could say it's worked. But I guess, start looking at the team. I was a little bit, not perplexed, but I thought maybe it could have been a little bit more braver, I think is the word, in his choice of starting lineup. But I guess that moves me on to the subs. But I hold fire with that.
What did you make of the starting 11, Temps? With no Ryan Yates, the midfield kind of picked itself. So were you pretty comfortable with what Houghton went with?
I'm a big Joe Lolley fan. I want to see him get more of a chance, more of a run. I think he's the one that isn't getting the minutes that he perhaps deserves. Freeman's easy to point at because he's not producing at the minute. You're looking for goals and assists from that position, and he's not really providing them. I think Joe Lolley undoubtedly had that downturn in form, but persisting with him will bring the best out of him. He's at a stage of his career now where he's going to be consistent if he's backed, if he knows he's in that side, and if he's got that license to make mistakes. Because as soon as Joe Lolley plays without fear, he cuts inside and lashes it into the top corner. Central midfield, I think is where Houghton's made real strides forward in recent weeks. So it's a bit tougher for Yatesy to get in that side now, and he's probably the most complete box-to-box midfielder we have. And quite clearly, Houghton wants to give prominence to those guys that he signed. I think that's a really encouraging thing. He's been able to bring those players in, very much his players. Murray, Kravinovic, Garner, Knockhart's clearly someone he rates extremely highly, and he's determined to play those guys where he can. But that Freeman position will come under increasing pressure from Amiobi and Lolley unless he can up his production.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think he's become a bit of a target. I don't think he's that bad, but he isn't producing what you'd expect a player of his CV, perhaps. The first half, I was not bitterly disappointed. I was quite disappointed in the way Forest went about the game. I can understand you give their centre halves the ball because they're not going to hurt you, but were Forest way too passive when Bird got the ball and Knight got the ball, Temp? Should they have got about their midfield a lot more until Forest went ahead?
Yeah, it didn't look like being a great game, did it, in that first 30 minutes when Derby tried to spoil it and we sat off. I think it's extremely frustrating. It was a really good point made in commentary that you can't play a high press when your lone striker is 37 and perhaps has to conserve a bit of energy and come alive when the ball's around him. So, yeah, really disappointing. But given the personnel we have available to us in this 4-5-1/4-2-3-1 system, it's hard to have that high press. So what does Houghton want to do? He wants to settle into games. He wants to earn the right to play. He wants to establish solidity defensively, which he's undoubtedly done over the last few weeks. But yeah, I do sit there being frustrated sometimes, wishing we'd attack a bit more, a bit sooner.
What did you make of the first half, Mikey? And certainly until Forest went ahead.
Yeah, but it's hard to disagree with what Temps is saying. I think one of the things I was concerned at before the game was Derby's fullbacks are pretty good. Nathan Byrne, I think they got from Wigan, didn't he? Is he the one with Buchanan? Young lad who bombs up and down. So there was obviously a worry that if we sort of pressed higher or lost our shape at all, they would bomb on and get behind us, and I can understand that. But I think after sort of half an hour of the first half, I don't know whether this is because, there's obviously no crowd there, but it did feel a little bit sort of training ground testimonially a little bit. And I think we both used the words on social media, passive. And I think that's kind of what it felt like to me. Just both teams almost waiting for the other to make a mistake. And us being the away team, I can kind of understand that we just sort of sit in, wait for the one opportunity, and thankfully we'll move on to that. But thankfully we got it and went one up. So I wasn't too perturbed with how sort of the first half took shape. Weirdly enough, we played really well in the second, and yet I'm more frustrated with the second half and how that went, which is strange. Maybe we can explore that in a minute, Matt.
We will. Is it worth talking about the goal? I mean, was it a really good strike by Garner? It's obviously worth talking about a goal. That's a stupid point, but it was kind of a pretty obvious what happened. I mean, Marshall dived over it, didn't he? But anything other to say about the goal, Temps?
No, he can't believe that went in. He's fluffed it. He's caught the ground. It's bobbled, and the keeper should save that. I don't know if he was carrying that injury in. He obviously had some kind of discomfort. But yeah, he looks like a Sunday morning keeper in his technique and the manner in which he jumped over that. You've seen a couple of my free kicks on Twitter, Matt, against some stumpy little fellas in the Welsh Division 3. I think it was terrible keeping. Garner can't believe his luck.
I'm impressed how this is probably the third time you've been on this, and you mentioned free kicks in the Welsh League every time. That's a skill in itself.
That's I'm very
impressed. Mikey, I said on Twitter at half time, and I said it on Twitter, so I'm going to stick to my guns. They should have brought Lolley on at half time and gone after Derby. Do you think was I being a bit overly ambitious there? And actually, Houghton got it right because Forest were good in the second half and did play it quite well. Did play very well.
Yeah, no, I can understand that point of view, and I think I probably would have changed it after sort of 10, 15 minutes that second half, because we started to take control of the game. Derby were pushed back at least 10 yards. They barely got out their own half for about a 15-minute spell, and we were having one or two half chances. And I think that was the time to try and go for the kill. Don't have to fundamentally change your structure or your shape, but bringing on somebody that can play that role on the left or the right, be it Lolley or Amiobi, I think was the positive move to be. But Chris is a very pragmatic guy, isn't he? So maybe he wasn't going to do that. So I think maybe half-time was being a little bit optimistic, Matt. But I think as the second half progressed, there was definitely cause for discussion on whether we could have freshened it up in those wide areas.
Yeah, I mean, can we be critical of Houghton? Because Forest played very well. They're playing very well. He's definitely doing a great job. So would we have a point in criticising Houghton for being too conservative tonight or not?
I don't criticise him. I would like to see him make more subs. I think you look at that bench and you look at the wealth and the depth of the Forest squad, and you think one area of competitive advantage could be bringing on fresh quality in that kind of 60 to 70 minute mark, rather than making a defensive sub late on or bringing Tyler Blackett on the left wing or trying to solidify. I think he's going to learn a lot more about this squad if he can try and be a bit more adventurous when it's required as we get towards that hour mark. And look, for me, I don't want to put a downer on things, but I think we are building a team to compete next season. I think he should be experimenting with that in mind. I think it's a long stretch to get into that top six. And look, of course, he's going to set out to win every game, but maybe there should be a little bit more willingness to rotate, a little bit more willingness to make positive changes from the bench to take advantage of that wealth of wide players that we have at the club.
Are Derby actually any good? I mean, I thought they were really poor, but am I being harsh on Derby? Because they have been playing very well. What did you make of Derby, Mikey?
I was disappointed with them, to be honest, but in a good way. Obviously, I didn't want them to be good. I thought they started okay, and I think they had those half chances, didn't they? But I think as the game wore on, they seemed just as nervous, if not more nervous. And then when we took control of the game at 1-0, I understood his substitutions around getting Gregory on, changing the shape. But even then, didn't feel too worried, to be honest. I thought Derby were below par, which is why I couldn't really understand them bringing Tyler Blackett on, to be honest, because it wasn't as if they were bombarding us with crosses or having 2-on-1s on the wide areas where we needed to sort of tuck in and get that extra man at the far stick. So in answer to your question, Matt, no, I didn't think they were very good, really. I thought it was a chess match, and I thought it's one that we should have won comfortably, I think.
What did you make of Derby, Terence?
Yeah, the Joe Worrell quote, which we'll be waking up to tomorrow, was, "They're not Barcelona, are they?"
Yeah,
and they're not. I think they showed a lack of adventure. I think they were trying to spoil it. I think there were some quite niggly fouls in the game, and no, they weren't particularly impressive. It would take a lot for me to fornicate over any kind of Derby side, Matt. But no, they were there for the taking, and we didn't quite get away.
Who were the difference makers for you, Temps, for Forest tonight? Who stood out?
Look, Kravinovic is the one for me that's made the biggest impact since coming into the side. Seems to have that willingness to work, which is quite rare as a 10. You'd like to see him carrying on those runs into the box and maybe getting more shots off in 90 minutes. But for me, he's become a key player. Cafu's really surprised me. He's a completely different player to the one that I thought we'd signed when he first arrived and in those first few games. He seems to have a bit of everything. Some of his range of passing and some of the stuff he tries on the volley and some of the two-touch he plays is really quite impressive. And then there's a period in the first half where Knockaert became early Ronaldo at Man U and seemed really keen to draw in the player, skip past them. He had the Megs and the Cruyff, didn't he, in quick succession, and he's got that real quality. And if he can turn that into goals and assists, then he's an absolute weapon at this level. So yeah, I think a bit of an embarrassment of riches in midfield. We really just need to work out how best to deploy it.
Mm-hmm. I must admit, I didn't slag Cafu off on the podcast, but I question whether he was any better than what we already have. I think he's definitely won me over with his performance in midfield. I thought he was very good. Who stood out for you, Mikey?
Yeah, very similar. I thought Knockaert was fantastic second half. He some of his silky touches were clearly more suited to probably a higher level than what we're playing at now. I think Joe Worrell said on his interview afterwards, that he was great, Knockaert, and you can see why he's a Premier League player. And I think that link up with I might get a bit of stick for saying this, but I think the link up with Christie down the right is taking shape. Everybody was a little bit upset that the Cash Lolley link up from last season was broken up. And I'm not saying these two can be anywhere near as sort of dynamic as that, but you did see today, and you have seen it in recent games, the early signs of a good understanding between those guys. So I think Knockout was good. I think Cafu, like Tim said, was excellent. Both centre backs up until the last 5 minutes were very good. And I think all round it was a half decent, solid team performance with obviously Knockout and maybe Joe Worrell and Cafu standing out.
No, I think Christie's been all right. I think Christie deserved credit for good performances recently, certainly since the Swansea game, where I don't think he was at his best. Did Knockout's performance in a way sum up the fact that there were no fans there? Because I was saying to Mikey before we started, if Knockout was playing like that against Forest, I'd want someone to absolutely smash him and put him over the touchline into the stands, and maybe with fans in the ground that would have happened. So, did the game miss fans a lot, Temps? Do you think?
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. I mean, that game, the tension. Whenever we play Derby, some of the cricket scores we've had in the past, some of the red cards, Nathan Tyson's behaviour, the Huckabee Harewood Johnson game that you were talking about earlier. It is what it is because of the fans. None of those players grew up watching that game, apart from Joe Worrell. So yeah, look, football, sport in general, is nothing without fans. Apart from the Forest games, I'm getting a bit of boredom's the wrong word, but it's just like the Premier League's just a noise now. It's just going on all the time. I can't wait to get back in a football stadium, Matt. It's not the same watching on TV. And yes, that game will never be what it needs to be without there being a full house at the City Ground or at Derby's place.
Yeah, I must admit my interest in the Premier League has waned considerably, partly through VAR as well. But yeah, I certainly hear what you're saying there. With the Derby goal then, Mikey, Temp said he thought it was handball. I didn't. I thought it was Figueiredo's error, but I wouldn't dig Figueiredo out because he was excellent. What was your view of the Derby goal, Mikey?
I didn't think it was handball until I saw the replay, and I think he kicks it and it bounces up. So, you just mentioned VAR, Matt. I think that gets ruled out in the Premier League, to be honest. But then again, I think Yates's does on Wednesday. So it's swings and roundabouts, isn't it, really? So, you know what? And I think Joe said in his post-match interview, if somebody's going to smash it in from 20 yards, there's not really that much you can do about it. I think you can question the clearance from Figueiredo. But I think other than that, I think he was really good. He made some really good one-on-one clearances. I think his positional sense was good. He was winning set-piece headers. He won a couple. Which I was pleased with, because they don't always get Figs marking players. Sometimes he's a spare man, which has always confused me as a centre back for me. So it's really hard, and I don't want to nitpick, sorry, because you can pinpoint any part of the match to suit the narrative that you're trying to say, and I think that overall we were really good. So I don't want to pick issues with some of our performance levels, but their goal, it's just one of them things, Matt. I would have rather smash it in from 20 yards than scramble from a corner in the last minute or free kick like it was last season, because that annoyed me and a hell of a lot of Forest fans more because of the way we sort of gave that away. This was a half mistake that was punished by a cracking strike. There's nothing more to say for that. And I think the Ghana goal as well, I shouted at TV on target, because the amount of chances that would just balloon over the bar, I was just pleased he hit it on target, and it just shows you what can happen if you keep the ball down, get your head over the ball, hit it low, and it goes in. So yeah, just one of them things, Matt. I'm not overly disappointed. If he's going to smash it in from 20 yards, what can you do?
Yeah, you'd have smashed it in from 20 yards in the Welsh League, Temps, wouldn't you?
I would against those 4-foot keepers, mate. Yes, but yeah, great strike. Samba so good. Sorry, Brice Samba, good position. Nearly got there, didn't he? Nearly got there, but just that little bit too much quality on the strike.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think my gripe would be that Forest weren't 2-0 ahead, and then it wouldn't really matter so much, because that's where they should have been 2 ahead by now. By that point, I think. What about a man of the match for Forest? Then, who would you give it to, Temps?
I thought Joe Worrell was excellent again tonight. He's really demonstrated why he is head and shoulders amongst the defenders at the club, because he can defend, but he's also a ball player as well. And if you look across that back four and think, could you get promoted with these guys? What are they lacking? I think the others are all lacking something. So while Figueiredo's had a good few weeks, his passing leaves a lot to be desired, doesn't it? I think there are elements of his defending and his concentration has really, really picked up. So I'm going to give it to Joe Worrell. Honourable mentions to Knockaert and Krovinovic.
Mikey?
I think I'd go for Knockaert, just because if you hadn't seen those two teams before and you just tuned in and you'd watch that match, I think all eyes would be drawn to him and the skill level and his running both ways. His set piece delivery was fantastic at times, and I think he stood out. It's just a shame he couldn't, create that one chance that could have nicked it for us. So I think when it's a draw, you always tend to, human nature is you go for a solid midfielder or solid defender or whatever. But I think on reflection, I think Knockaert was head and shoulders above pretty much everybody on that pitch. So I'll go for him.
Yeah, I'd go for Knockaert as well, or Krovinovic as well. Probably they both have the same fault, especially Krovinovic. You probably want to see more of an end product, more assists and more goals from him, which is probably the reason he's not in the Premier League with West Brom. So every player has their faults. Let's finish up by just talking about where this team finishes this season. You kind of hinted at it before, Temps. Is this more about you're not worried about relegation now, and you want to see Chris Hughton build for next season and with some good ambition to finally go up next season?
Exactly. My hunch is we're not going up or down. So use this time wisely to think about how we plan that assault next year. I told my theories, Matt. I think it was about this time last year that people within Forest started talking about the need to sell Matty Cash, not because they wanted to, but because they had to get FFP to a point where they could trade, where they could have an active transfer window. And you just wonder whether that same conversation is happening now with Joe Worrell, because he's a saleable asset. He's a young defender with England ambitions whose absolute dream is to play in the Premier League with Forest. But you get the impression that if he had to do it with somebody else, and he was kind of told by the club that this was a call they'd made, he'd have to go for that move. So I trust in Hughton. I think he's going to use this time wisely, but I do have this nagging fear that Worrell might have to be sacrificed to make FFP room to have a particularly active transfer window.
No, I agree with what you're saying. The only thing I wonder about is how the hell does FFP stand up now when clubs can just turn around and say, well, actually, our biggest source of revenue hasn't been in the ground for a year, or one of their biggest sources of revenue. So you do wonder what happens there. But yeah, Worrell's the last. Is Worrell the last saleable asset? I think he is, probably, isn't he? Mikey, what happens for the rest of this season and beyond now?
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, that. So I think, was it about a year ago, we signed a lot of our younger players up to long-term deals. I think Worrell signed a 4-year contract. Mighton, similarly. Yatesy, I think, signed one as well. So, over the years, Matt, we've always had to sell one player, right? Every season, at least, be it Brereton, back to Andy Reid, all those. It goes back. So, yeah, that is a fear, but I guess you have to cut your cloth accordingly. And if that's what we have to do, I'd like to think that there is a plan in place to strengthen a bit more wisely, perhaps, than we did in the summer. I think that's all I'll say on that. But in terms of this season, Matt, I think we are probably the definition of a mid-table side now, really. We're probably not good enough to challenge for that top 6 at the moment. And Chris is still finding his, still finding out about a lot of the players, I think. And I think that will come. If you look at what happened at Brighton under his tenure, that happened with them in their second and third seasons. They got that shape and they got the way of playing and they pushed forward. So I think this season we'll probably finish mid-table. Between 10th and 12th, perhaps, and I think it's all about building for next season. If we have to sell one of our saleable assets, be that Mighton or Yatesy or Worrell, please just invest a little bit more sensibly and with let's not overload one position, which I think we did this summer. Let's make sure that people like Gary Brazil and everybody like that has a say, and we do it in a structured way, rather than sort of chuck a load of things at the wall and see what sticks. So, yeah, mid-table for me this season, Matt, and then push on next.
Absolutely. I think, I feel bad for forgetting about Myson and Johnson as very good young players who unfortunately might well be sold in the future. That's another topic for another day. Last question, a one-word answer one. Who has the better football team, Nottingham Forest or Derby County, Temps?
Forest.
Mikey?
Yeah, Forest. That's 2 words, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're a better team technically, and I'd feel much more. I mean, obviously you feel better being a Forest fan, but you know what I mean. I think they've got a better team and better long-term prospects. So let's end that on a positive note, and hopefully reflect on this being a good point in the long term. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We shall be back with a full podcast next week, probably on Wednesday. Hope everyone enjoys their weekend, and we shall see you soon.